Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
Alaska families are struggling to find and afford quality childcare for their kids. It's affecting jobs, the state's economy, and children. The lack of childcare options prompted the governor to form a task force to look for solutions. We'll hear what recommendations are coming from the group right now on Alaska Insight. Good evening. It's critical that families in Alaska have access to childcare that not only keeps kids safe, but also engages them with structured educational and social skills development. Learning is critical to helping them develop good routines for future success. But as you'll hear tonight, even before the pandemic, Alaska was grappling with a shortage of licensed childcare facilities, and that shortage has only gotten more severe. We'll hear from members of the governor's task force on childcare about potential solutions. But before we get to that discussion, here are some of the top stories of the week from Alaska Public Media's collaborative statewide news network. Iditarod competitor Dallas Seavey told reporters he believes race officials made the right call in issuing him a 2-hour penalty stemming from an encounter with a moose during the first quarter of the race. According to Seavey, his team passed directly by a moose between the Skwentna and Finger Lakes checkpoints. He says he shot and killed the moose after it began kicking his dog team. Per race rules, Seavey was required to gut the moose so that its meat could be salvaged, but race officials determined he did not do so adequately, with other mushers reporting their teams ran over the carcass. The Iditarod Trail Committee didn't provide specifics about what exactly was inadequate in Seavey's hasty field dressing. The Alaska House and Senate have asked Governor Mike Dunleavy to withdraw 3 of the 12 executive orders he issued at the start of the legislative session and are planning up or down votes on at least 6 others. The orders affect various state boards, commissions, and agencies by dissolving, splitting, or otherwise changing their structures. According to a draft plan shared with reporters last week, the votes will take place March 12th during a joint session of the House and Senate. If the governor's office doesn't withdraw the 3 requested orders, Senate President Gary Stevens said he expects those to be brought up during the joint meeting. As of Monday, the governor's communications office said it had no information on the views of the governor's office about the legislative plan. Alaska Republicans chose Donald Trump over Nikki Haley by an overwhelming margin during Tuesday's party-run presidential preference poll. Trump won about 88% of the vote in the contest, which saw 10,500 Republican voters cast ballots across much of the state. The party won't finalize numbers until next week, but preliminary results, as well as Haley's announcement that she will end her campaign after similar results in other states, all but guarantees Trump has won all 29 of the delegates Alaska will send to the Republican National Convention this summer. You can find the full versions of these and many more stories on our website, alaskapublic.org, or by downloading the Alaska Public Media app on your phone. We're launching directly into our discussion tonight. Here to describe the work that's been done to address the shortage of child care providers and facilities is Katie Capozzi. Katie is the president and CEO of the Alaska Chamber and a member of the governor's task force on child care. Also in the studio with us is Nick Moe. Nick is the public policy manager with THREAD, a child care resource and referral network across Alaska. THREAD also has a seat on the governor's task force. Welcome, both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So, Katie, I want to start with you. Give us a quick overview of the work the task force is undertaking and your role in it.
Yeah, thank you. So the task force was created last April by the governor, and it has 12 voting members on it. My role is serving as the broader voice for the business community across the state. Much of the task force is comprised of child care experts, advocates for the child care industry, owners of child care facilities, parents. So I'm a little bit of an outcast, I guess, if you will, in that I don't know the lingo. I've had a lot to learn, but it is a fantastic group that at the end of the day cares about increasing access to and and creating a more affordable landscape for childcare. So we have been meeting since last June. And it's been pretty intense. I'm not sure how many hundreds of hours have been dedicated to the task force, but it's an awful lot. We had our first set of recommendations that went to the governor in December. We're back at it, and we are taking a deeper dive into looking at a couple of studies that the state commissioned, namely the True Cost of Care study. We'll be seeing those results soon, and that's when the task force kind of has a lot of work cut out for ourselves to decide what we do with that information and what sort of recommendations we make from there from a funding standpoint.
Great, thank you for starting us off there. We'll drill down a little bit more as we go forward. But Nick, THRED is represented on the task force by your CEO, Stephanie Berglund. Describe THRED's priorities for the task force, what you'd like to see coming out of it.
Yeah, well, a few things. Well, THRED is Alaska's resource and referral organization for childcare. It means we provide direct services to childcare providers, to programs all over the state, including parents, connecting them with care and resources. THRED's been operating for more than 39 years, and we know intimately the challenges and opportunities that we have to help kind of solve this childcare crisis that we're in. And I think, we look at it through the main three buckets of access, affordability, and quality. We want to see all those three things in our childcare system. And if you take a look, we're seeing programs closing. We're seeing programs not being able to keep staff. We're seeing parents unable to afford childcare. And that's why it's incredibly important that we help work with the task force and our amazing partners like Katie, who are absolute champions of childcare and know that from a business perspective, to help move the needle on some of this good public policy we're trying to fix.
Mm-hmm. Katie, you mentioned this briefly, that the first set of recommendations are out. What are they?
Oh, there's a lot. I think we have more than 35, but we kind of broke them into some buckets. So we have a workforce bucket, licensing, background checks, and some tribal recommendations. So they can be found on the Department of Health's website, but they cover everything from what I will call easy button type regulatory changes that can be made, all the way to some, heavier lifts, which include something like recommending subsidized wages for child care workers and everything in between. We talk about tax credits for businesses. We have an amazing task force member who really made some strong recommendations on the tribal piece to try to get tribal and the state just aligned to be able to become licensed and have some exceptions where it's appropriate. So we have a lot, but that kind of covers the main buckets.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to add?
Another task force member that I'm very appreciative of is Representative Julie Kalum, who is the sponsor of House Bill 89, which would make childcare more affordable for thousands of Alaskan families. And I think having that kind of combination of expertise and at one table, fleshing all of these things out. 33 recommendations is a lot, but I think there's a lot of agreement that more needs to be done at kind of the state level.
All right. And Katie, you are representing, as you noted, the business interests in Alaska through the Chamber. You're working with the Chamber. What do you hear from them about the impact of employees and folks not being able to have reliable child care for their kids?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I guess I should back up a little bit. I heard Nick start to describe what THRED is. I shouldn't assume that everyone knows what the Alaska Chamber is, but we are the state's largest business advocacy organization. Our mission is to promote a healthy business environment in Alaska. We have over 700 members, big companies, small businesses located all over the state of Alaska. So really a varying degree of interests, but something I'm hearing from the large majority of them is that childcare is an issue. I hadn't really heard that from them until COVID hit. Mm-hmm. And so kind of the assumption, I think honestly for a lot of employers too, is that this was a COVID problem. And we went along with that kind of theory until suddenly, business was back open, we were in recovery mode, but the crisis still existed. And so that's when they really, I think, the business community kind of started looking around going, okay, like this is a business issue. We need to start leading in this area and talking about it a lot more. So the crisis hasn't gone away. In fact, it's in many cases gotten worse. And so that's when they, asked the Chamber to kind of step in and start talking about this from a business issue. They are losing employees. They're having a hard time recruiting employees, retaining employees. And I think the most interesting thing that we've seen across the membership is this is not just an income issue. There's a lot of big members I have who pay very good salaries, and those people still can't find childcare because there's just an access issue. There's not enough slots for kids that need daycare. So the mission I have from my board and my membership is to help try to be part of the solution here.
Do you think that that might be one of the few bright things that came out of the pandemic, is that this shift in thinking for business owners that, hey, it's not just the parents'
Social issue, yeah.
It's much larger, that children need good support, to keep them safe, as we said, but also so that they're learning and so that they can be more successful in the future. We know there's plenty of studies that show that early development helps. Do you think that this shift in thinking for businesses could really have a big impact on potential policy changes and things like that because of newer thinking about these things?
Absolutely, without question. And we see that happen in Alaska. We see it happening across the country, where the business community has finally, I think, felt comfortable in this space because they realized it. And we've all kind of looked around and realized that this is a problem that all businesses are sharing. And so we've jumped in and frankly, when the business community speaks up, we are the revenue creators in Alaska, we're the job creators, and so we need a healthy economy. And so I think we're able to get a little bit more attention from maybe some unlikely allies in Juneau and in Washington, D.C. So it's been refreshing, and I think we certainly have surprised some people coming down to Juneau, especially to say, hey, we're the chamber and we care about childcare, and they just kind of look around like, oh, you do? So it's been a good discussion.
Nick, THRED reports that more than 60% of Alaskans live in areas considered childcare deserts. Tell us how a childcare desert is defined and how the provider landscape has changed since the pandemic.
Excuse me, I just wanted to add Katie's comment real quick. I was so heartened to see your legislative priorities list out childcare right on the brochure, and that is so huge. And I can't speak enough to the situation we're in. I mean, there's 148 programs that have closed down in the last 3 years. That represents 1/4 of all child care programs in the state. And more are teetering on the edge at the same time that our COVID relief funds are running out this year. And at the same time, through our partnership with Alaska Chamber, we have an economic impact report that just came out this fall that showed 51% of parents could either enter the workforce or take on more hours if they had access to childcare. And then if we look at the Department of Labor saying there are 2 job openings for every 1 Alaskan looking for work, we have to work to connect these dots. And that's where it's such a strength to have the Alaska Chamber of Commerce and Katie out here, helping address this crisis, because we can't do it alone. This affects the whole community. In the economic report, it shows that $4.6 billion of payroll is allowed to be generated because of childcare. So every single program that closes represents less payroll going to our state, represents more families that might need to move out of the state. And so we have to do whatever we can to help keep businesses open. It's so much easier to keep a business open than to start a new one. And we have programs right now that are working incredible hours, doing the best they can, and the math is just not adding up for them.
One of the things that we talked about earlier this week on Talk of Alaska was the fact that child care workers were not considered essential workers during the pandemic, which is such a huge disconnect. Is that being addressed adequately now, so that if hopefully we don't have future crises, but if we do, that they will have that designation?
Yes, that was also a surprise to us during the pandemic. That was one of the recommendations that came out of the task force, and to my knowledge, that is being corrected. That is, again, one of those easy button fixes that the state can do we don't need a legislative power to do that, but that's something that can happen from a regulation standpoint. So it is my understanding that is being addressed.
Good,
yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And Nick, turning back to you, that affordability is, of course, a big factor. The percent of household income used for childcare range from 12 to 34%. The highest percentage is for single moms. Talk about the risk for families facing that kind of financial vulnerability and what some possible solutions might be.
It's huge. It's a huge issue, and I think any parent knows the cost and the patchwork of childcare that you have to put together to make things work. When I have 2 kiddos, I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and when my wife went back to school, we were on 1 income trying to afford childcare for 2 kids, and it was incredibly hard. And I know that it's getting worse just because programs can't afford to keep the lights on with what parents can pay. It's just not enough right now. And so what we really need to do is a few things, and I think I mentioned House Bill 89, sponsored by Representative Kalum. That does a huge amount of progress to make childcare more affordable by changing the eligibility for who qualifies for public assistance, by capping some of the costs for the copays. And so more families would be able to qualify for those programs. And as Katie said, acknowledging the cost of care, which is being looked at by the Child Care Task Force.
And socializing and education are important parts of quality childcare, as we know. THRED numbers cited last year in a Newsminer article said only 23% of kids are able to access early childhood programs. During the State of the Union speech, the president mentioned the impact to future success for children who can attend Head Start. What does your research say about that impact on formal education if they start school without access to either Head Start or some other, preschool type educational structured setting?
It's astounding. Children that go through a quality childcare setting are more prepared for kindergarten by double percentage points. They are more likely to graduate high school. They're less likely to be incarcerated for a crime when they're older. And they're able to build those skills that they'll need for being a student and for life, having a positive relationship with an adult, and having a consistent, warm place to go that offers a meal and socialization. It's incredibly important for children, and that's something that we talk about the economic benefits, but this is all about Alaska's future, and if we can figure this out, this will have a huge return on investment in the future.
And of course, pay is another issue that needs addressing. A recent Associated Press article noted 70% of Head Start teachers have bachelor's degrees, but they're making less than $40,000 a year. That was a stunning number to me. What needs to happen to fix this disconnect between the need to have well-educated people in these roles and helping them provide high-quality care, but also getting their pay so that they can make a living wage and possibly pay off student debt that they have?
Oh, exactly. Right now, the men and women, mostly women, who are caring for Alaska's children are not paid enough. And that's apparent in our economic impact report. It showed that the average wage was $14 an hour, less than a gas station attendant. And how we fix that is to provide a basic level of support to programs, similar to how the City and Borough of Juneau did. They provided a basic level of support to programs using local dollars. They were able to raise their wages from $12 an hour to more than $18 an hour. And if you give these business owners extra financial support, they put it towards the workforce. They know that that's the most bang for their buck to retain quality employees and maintain that consistency for the kids that's very important. And we also have a program at THRED called the Roots Award, retaining our outstanding teachers. That's another way we can show our appreciation to give our teachers and early educators an annual stipend to encourage more training, to help reward them for getting more education. That increases the quality of care.
Katie, you talked a little about this earlier. The next assignment is to identify the true cost of care. What does that mean, and what will you be looking at as part of the task force? How will the task force look at capturing that true cost?
Nick might actually have a little bit more information on that, but to my understanding, we're waiting for the report to come out, but we're looking at the subsidies that are currently out there, what people who aren't on subsidy paying. I think the last time we did a true cost of care study, Nick, you might know, but it's been decades, I think. So just with inflation and everything else that goes along with it and the cost of rent and everything, we just don't have a good grip on what the true cost of care is across the state. The other thing that I've encouraged the group to look at is also what it's going to cost the state to administer all these programs too, because that is going to factor into what the true cost of care for childcare is. So there are so many bits and pieces that go into the true cost of care. And I do want to say that I think a lot of people, especially a lot of parents who are looking at their child care bills that might be $2,000 a month or $2,400 a month, they're paying more than their mortgage. they might have it in their mind that these folks running the child care facilities are running around driving Porsches, because if I'm paying $2,400 a month and everyone else is paying, like, how is this not an affordable model? But that's the other thing that we kind of want to show is when you do the breakdown, there's just not a lot of margin for error for these child care owners. So it's a very delicate business model. Some people call it a broken business model. And so we're looking at opportunities to help, Nick covered a lot of the discussion in terms of what, kind of some government programs can do, but we're also hoping that the private sector can be part of the solution too. So offering space that's available, tax credits to offer to their employees to, access childcare, the consideration of maybe chipping in on wages for childcare workers versus that coming as a subsidy through the state. So this is definitely an all hands on deck problem, and it's going to take everybody to figure this out.
You did a survey called the Unmapped Potential. What did you find?
The untapped potential.
Untapped,
yes.
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Untapped potential. that's I can say that's actually kind of what I think really helped push the Alaska Chamber into this space. Is we partnered with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. They've done these reports in a handful of states across the country to try to find what our economy was missing out on by people choosing not to enter the workforce because of lack of access or affordability. So we were really focused on these parents who wanted to work but couldn't because of no access or it was just too expensive. And we found out that, the Alaska economy there's $237 million missing from the economy each year because of parents not able to enter the workforce. And then the piece that I've really kind of driven home with my membership is of that 237, I think it's around $50 million is what it's costing employers to, because they're losing people or not able to retain employees to get new folks through the door, and who knows how long you're able to keep employees that way. So $50 million just to employers because you're losing people due to lack of access or affordability.
And as you noted, it's going to take everyone, and you've got a good example of a business that really thought this through and designed for that very purpose. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Credit Union One has a facility here in Anchorage. The former president and CEO is a true visionary in my opinion, and recognized that childcare is part of the business expense of running a business. And so they were very fortunate, and from the get-go they knew they were building a new facility, and they decided to build a childcare facility right into the headquarters there. Those employees are Credit Union One employees. They are treated with the same benefits package as a regular, a bank teller, all the way up to the president and CEO. And it's been an enormously successful program for Credit Union One. And a fun story that the current president and CEO likes to tell is one of the first kids that they had go through the program as an infant now works at the bank. So we always joke about how that's like true workforce development, visionary program. So in my opinion, what Credit Union One is doing is kind of the gold standard for employers. Not every employer can do that, particularly our small businesses. That's just unrealistic for them to do something like that.
Yeah. But what a gold standard.
Amazing.
They set
Yeah, it's amazing.
Sure. Well, we only have a few minutes left, but Nick, there are other benefits of having highly trained providers caring for children, such as identifying signs of trauma or neglect. Talk a little bit about how important that is in that regard.
Yeah, that's not my personal area of expertise,
Sure.
but I know just from working at Thread that's incredibly important to focus on, and that we have a generation of children that went through the pandemic that are expressing issues in different ways that are challenging to child care providers. So any additional support that we can give programs could go to the mental health and well-being of children as well. I think that's one of the top priorities for a lot of folks.
And we've been discussing childcare, but are preschools part of the consideration here too, or are there provisions that would help more parents afford Head Start in preschool?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely, what Katie was saying, that we need everything. We need all hands on deck. And some of the challenge with pre-K programs is it's only part-time, or it's not an annual program. It's only during school years. And so you still have to figure out, summer plans or morning plans for parents. And what would be ideal is if there's more programs that could offer that consistency, that complement the pre-K options. And I'd point out that Alaska is not alone in dealing with this challenge. Other states have been going through this, and we just saw a report from one of our national partners that talked about some of the statistics and showed Alaska lagging behind the rest of the country in program closures and the rate of program openings. And I look at a state like North Dakota, a state that has a similar population, similar economy. They just put $66 million into their child care system of multi-year funding, doing the similar things that we're talking about here of increasing quality, giving stipends to teachers, and providing programs, so that extra support. And that's why THREAD is partnered with 8 other early education and child care nonprofits around the state to, for our legislative ask this year, beyond what the Child Care Task Force is dealing with, which is on the policy side, we're asking for an increase to the operating budget to help support programs.
Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much to both you for being here this evening, and also for the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us to help this situation.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks for having us.
There's plenty of research and evidence that shows how quality preschool care for children makes a huge difference for future successful outcomes. The Annie E. Casey Foundation reported last fall that more than 50% of the nation's preschool children were not in a structured learning environment, and kids who most benefit from early learning programs are the least likely to have access to them. Children who enter kindergarten behind their peers could struggle for years to catch up. This isn't just a concern for families, it's a problem for all of us who want to see healthy, happy children thrive in school, life, and future employment. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. Visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from our partner stations across the state. While you're there, sign up for our free daily digest so you won't miss any of Alaska's top stories of the day. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.